Well, I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today, particularly at this event, which is a really important event, I think, for Europe looking forward. So, like Mr. Rain, the previous speaker, I'm going to talk to you about thrills, about excitement, and about the reasons for optimism, because there are lots of reasons to be optimistic, particularly as we look at the challenges that face us and thinking what sort of Europe and what sort of world would we like. So we want a Europe that is exciting, that is interesting, that's successful, that's sustainable, and a Europe that can stand up to global challenges. So how do we deliver that? Well, you deliver that by science, by engineering and by technology. Those are some of the fundamental platforms that we can use in order to be able to deliver what we want. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic, and if we look at Europe's track record in terms of science and engineering, then I would say to you that the impact of what is done in Europe is extremely high, but it could be a lot higher. So that's always good to have a goal that you can aspire to. So we need to do more with the science that we do and the knowledge that we generate. And I thought I would just pick out sort of 3 fundamental areas that I think that we should look at, because there's enormous potential to be realised from doing things that we already do well, doing more of them, but doing things better where we're not quite meeting the mark. So the 3 areas that I would like to talk about are looking at people, our human capital. I'd like to look at the area of knowledge, what we generate and what we do with it. And then I'd like to look at the whole idea of added value, because to my mind that's one of the greatest potentials of what we can do in the European Union with regard to science. Okay, so people first of all. I would argue that if we are to be successful, we need our best young people, our smartest young people, to be considering a career in science, engineering and technology. So for me this goes right back to primary education, where actually I don't know how many of you have gone into schools and spoken to young people, but when you speak to very young people about science, they're absolutely fascinated by it. And if you introduce yourself as a scientist, they almost want to touch you as if some of that would rub off on them. They're so excited by it. But we need to move that forward from primary school into secondary school education, where young people are seduced away from science by promises of an easy life, which they get by watching television, and they look at the cult of celebrity. Because indeed, if you ask most young people what they want to be when they grow up, they will tell you they would like to be a celebrity, because in many cases that will require little effort on their behalf, possibly little talent, but they'll get great reward. And they have been seduced by that. And they forget that that might last a small moment in time, but their contribution, their ability to fashion the Europe that we would want to see and the world we would want to see is very slim. So we need to get them to think about a career in science, and also we need to get their parents to understand what that means as well. And just think how few people know what being a scientist means. They know what a scientist looks like, and frankly, it's not a good image. Okay, so I can understand how many young people are not attracted by the idea of a man in a white coat with mad hair and goggle glasses. But that's not what the reality is. And so we need to put a lot of effort into making those bright young people come with us in a career in science, engineering and technology. The second thing we have to do is that we need a diverse workforce, and we need this very badly because science thrives on diversity. If you have a monoculture in a laboratory or in a research department in a business, then often your output can be, frankly, a little dull. And I'm particularly thinking of gender equality, because Europe will not succeed, and I really believe this, if we continue to allow women to come in and study science, engineering and technology, but we do not support them to stay in the careers. We need to keep the best people, always the best, so we need to focus on excellence, and we need to make sure that those people are retained. And I was struck listening to Mr. Rain earlier and thinking about Finland. Finland has got, in my mind, close on to exemplary parental leave arrangements, where you have 9 months, but 3 months must be taken by the woman or she loses it, and 3 months must be taken by the man or he loses it, and 3 months by either parent. Now, what that did, interestingly, was liberate men to take 3 months off to look after their children. But here's the thing we all need to think about. When they returned to their workplace, they were on average much more successful than their male counterparts who had not had parental leave, because they learned an awful lot of skills in looking after that young child. Now, we need to be, that's innovation, and we need to be innovative. We need to ensure, and it has to be utterly endemic throughout all of our activities, that we look at excellence and we support it where we see it. And that will require us to be very imaginative. And lastly, I think we need to support mobility. So the big advantage for science is that science is an international currency and it's an international language. So as a scientist, you can go anywhere, you can do anything, and you can contribute. So we need to make sure that the mechanisms, the infrastructure is in place to allow people to do that. Of course within Europe, but actually we always want to partner with the best worldwide. And so there's a bigger challenge there in looking at how we have mobility globally to attract the best and to partner with the best. So I think we have a challenge on our hands there, because I know it's not straightforward, but it's terribly important. Okay, so our people generate our knowledge, and we need to communicate what we do. And we need to do that systemically. We need to do it efficiently and effectively. And this should be an obligation on every researcher. Certainly everyone who receives European funding should be obliged to communicate their work. And not just to other scientists, because for one scientist that's a very easy thing to do, to communicate your work to another. It's a lot harder to communicate your work to funders, to encourage them to continue funding you. So that's one challenge. It's a challenge to convince policymakers and politicians about the value of the knowledge you're generating. And I would say if you don't do that effectively, they will not be in a position to use the knowledge you've generated. So the stakes are very high. And I mentioned earlier about young people. We need to effectively communicate what we do so that young people grasp the excitement of a life in science and they understand the power of the knowledge that's being produced. With the knowledge that we are generating now, we're inventing the future. That's what's in our hands. That's a very powerful thing, but only if we use it. And I would say that we have been at fault. And here I'm looking at myself and thinking the science community has been at fault, because we somehow regard that communication exercise as optional. Well, it's not optional, and we need to be quite aggressive about this. So we need to go out and lobby, we need to be knocking on the doors of those television stations, those radios, and we need to be telling them why what we've just discovered is so exciting. And, you can get into some trouble by doing this, but my goodness, it's a challenge. It is exciting, and it's fun when you get it right. So we must be thinking about this. If we don't tell people what we do, and if we who are producing the knowledge don't take a few extra steps, and if I'm in a research lab in a university, if I don't think about who might find this interesting in a company, I'm not thinking that I need to go and set up a company, but I'm obliged to think of who would find that knowledge useful in developing their agenda. So looking at the business environment. And we've heard that SMEs are crucial to our economy, and they're the very people who should be pulling in that knowledge that we generate. Now, I think one of the other things when we generate knowledge is that often it sounds quite, that's the best way to put this, it can sound unpleasant. So, for example, if I talk to you about the evidence behind man-made climate change, you will listen to me reluctantly. But frankly, the message that I'm giving would be quite uncomfortable. So we need to be much smarter in scientists working with social scientists in order to think, how do we deliver those messages? How do we make them interesting? So an example in climate change is that you don't say to people, you have to stop doing everything, you have to give up your car, you have to not fly, you have to use less, and so on. That's already making us feel quite uncomfortable. But what if I offered you something else? What if I said, can I give you something that money can't buy? Now that would be time. And actually, if you don't have a car, and I've learned this from personal experience, you have an awful lot more time because you don't have to park it, fix it, wash it, look after it, pay your parking fines on it, tax it, MOT it, or whatever. So there really is an opportunity, but we need to understand how knowledge is delivered. And there's a big opportunity of partnership there, I believe, with our social scientists. And I've already touched on this. I talked about the push of knowledge, so taking knowledge, and I'm encouraging people to push that knowledge out there. But that will not work if we don't have a system of smart procurement of knowledge from the business community. So we need to think about that very carefully, because I know to my cost there is no point in me going along to a large company or a small company and telling them all the exciting science that I do. It just doesn't work. What works is asking them, what are the main problems that you have at the moment? Where are the bottlenecks to increased profitability, productivity, success for you? So they need to tease out of us the knowledge that is useful for them. And we're very, very unpracticed at doing this. And I think that I wouldn't here say that this is all for the science community. I would say it's for the business community, because they can't be passive in this. They must be absolutely proactive in pulling the knowledge they need to make their lives more successful. And the last thing I would say is added value. Now, if you look at the total science budget of the European Union, I guess it's about, I'm not sure of the exact figure, but I'm thinking about 7% or so of the total budget spent by member states on research and development. Now, that's a very small budget, but it can be incredibly powerful if we focus on added value. If we think, what can't be achieved, what can't be delivered by member states, and what can we do that's added value? And I think we need to focus more and more on that to make every euro spent count in terms of what we do, and also to catapult European science from a very strong position. We have to be globally leading in what we generate, the quality of our science, the knowledge we generate, and what we do with that knowledge. And if we do that, we've got a very rosy future indeed. Thank you very much.